practice of issuing authorizations through GDR consulates and permanent exit with a GDR personal identity card via third countries. When asked when this new policy was to take effect, a nervous Schabowski shuffled through his documents. He didn't notice the sentence on the back of one paper embargoing the information until the following morning. That comes into effect, he replied, according to my information, immediately, without delay. Does this also apply for West Berlin? One journalist asked. Schabowski shrugged and then, frowning, looked back at his papers. He reread the key passage. Permanent exit can take place via all border crossings from the GDR to the FRG in West Berlin, respectively. In other words, the propaganda chief of East Germany announced live on camera that East Berliners were free to leave to West Berlin without any fear of repercussions. Not only did he announce it, but he had repeated it for good measure. The Berlin Wall was effectively now just a concrete structure.
Fuck.
The East German broadcast of the press conference began
My
at
shirt is
7:30
fucking
p.m.
shredded.
and the
The
East
sleeve is
Berliners
shredded
began to
by the
storm the
cats.
wall immediately thereafter. The guards had heard different rumors themselves and were left unsure of what to do. Open the gate,
Welcome,
chanted
everybody.
the people. The wall must go. For the first time in their lives, the citizens felt comfortable arguing with soldiers and Stasi officers, and they were safe to do so. The armed men argued back, but there was no move on their part to escalate matters to violence. It was a little after 9 p.m. when word came down from the bureaucracy. The more aggressive citizens were to be let through, but they should not expect to be allowed to return back. They were effectively not emigrating, but being deported. To the East Berliners, those terms were acceptable. By this point, all 6 East Berlin border checkpoints were mobbed, with 20,000 people at the Bornholmer Strasse checkpoint alone. Harold Yeager, the border guard commander stationed there, made a professional assessment of the situation. All I was thinking about now was to avoid bloodshed, Yeager explained. There were so many people, and they didn't have space to move. If a panic started, people would have been crushed. We had pistols. I had given instructions not to use them, but what if one of the men had lost his nerve? Yeager made an executive decision. He ordered his men to open the gate. 1 hour later, unaware of what had happened at Bornholmer Strasse, border guard commander Gunther Moll independently made the same decision at the notorious Checkpoint Charlie. The crossing.
Jesus.
Been closed to begin with. The video footage of the young border guards stepping aside as hundreds of East Berliners ran past them is particularly notable for one big reason. For once, the guards were smiling. The citizens of the GDR were greeted in West Berlin with flowers and champagne by their fellow Germans. By midnight, all 6 checkpoints were wide open, with all 12,000 border guards sent back to their barracks. Soon the entire world was watching in shock as residents of a united Berlin were literally dancing atop the Berlin Wall. There were still some half-hearted attempts to get them down. The East German police at one point tried to blast them off with a hose, only to be defeated by an umbrella. Helmut Kohl, who wasn't young but nevertheless still didn't understand some things, cut his trip to Poland short. I'm at the wrong party, he said. Nobody thought to phone Moscow until 5 a.m., and even then no one bothered to call Gorbachev. He only learned what had happened when he woke up the following morning to scenes that seemed unimaginable. He called Krenz to give his consent after the fact. You made the right decision, because how could you shoot Germans who walk across the border to meet other Germans, he said. Gorbachev still didn't quite realize that it hadn't really been Krenz's decision so much as a historic accident on Schabowski's part. Stuck in between Hungary and East Germany with Czechoslovakia, but Communist Party leader Miloš Jakeš intended to stay the course. As long as the economy holds up here, he had told his colleagues, we'll be all right. Just to be sure nothing went wrong, he increased patrols in areas used for popular gatherings or uprisings. But there was one popular gathering that the Czech authorities could not quash, the 50th anniversary of the murder of Jan Opeltal. Opeltal was a 24-year-old medical student shot by the Nazis for protesting against their occupation of Czechoslovakia. It was the Czech communists themselves who had propagandized him as a martyr in the decades following World War II. The anniversary march proceeded as planned on Friday, November 17, 1989, 8 days after the Berlin Wall was opened. The crowds held banners denouncing communism, commemorating the Prague uprising of 1968, but the police did nothing. When the march ended, most of the crowd dispersed, except for a group of mostly students who then made their way to Prague's historic Wenceslas Square. As they approached the square, they found their way blocked by both riot police and anti-terrorist squads, batons at the ready. The protesters gave the police their candles, and they gave the police their flowers. They sat down in the street, chanting, "We have no weapons," and singing songs. Then another group of riot police came up behind them. They were trapped on the street for 2 hours, singing songs in the freezing cold. told. When they asked if they could go home, the police said nothing. It was at 9 p.m. when a riot squad van arrived and began ramming into them. That's when the police began their beatings. Over 500 people were injured, men, women, and children alike, and the 120 who were arrested were thereupon beaten again. Supposedly there was one casualty, but the lesson of Jan Opeltal that the life of one student can make a powerful difference. Rumors in communist nations were often far more truthful than any official media source, and soon a story got out that the police had murdered a student by the name of Martin Schmidt. Foreign media outlets such as the BBC and Voice of America reported the unverified story as fact. There were, in reality, 2 students by the name of Martin Schmidt studying at Prague's Charles University at that time, and the government swiftly produced them both to demonstrate that they were perfectly safe and unharmed. After over 4 decades of communist rule, the authorities actually were telling the truth, and after over 4 decades of communist rule, the people did not believe them. Now that the authorities had chosen violence, everything was on the table. That weekend saw demonstrations that hadn't been seen in Prague since 1968, with the spot where the police had beaten the protesters taking on the form of a secular shrine. Students were now joined by every type of citizen, and all that the government could think to do in response was to arrest the activist who had spread the claim that Schmidt had been killed. The Czech analog to Lech Walesa was Václav Havel, their version of the dissident figurehead who fought the authorities for decades while getting arrested and subsequently released. A prominent playwright, Havel's career was destroyed due to his support of the Prague Spring. His words were banned in Czechoslovakia, while he himself was forbidden from leaving the country. Havel had suspected the end of the Berlin Wall meant that things would change swiftly in Czechoslovakia as well, and he returned to Prague from the countryside to take part in the escalating drama. Havel began to organize at a theater with the fortuitous name of the Magic Lantern. The protesters called themselves the Civic Forum and presented themselves as spokesmen for the people. They issued 4 demands. 1. The resignation of the leaders who had crushed the Prague Spring. 2. The resignation of the ministers who had ordered the attacks on the students. 3. An independent inquiry into the recent events. 4. The immediate release of all political prisoners. The protests grew and continued over the following days. The energy was felt in every segment of the country. Actors went on strike and so did the football players. The Monday alone after the police violence saw 300,000 protesters. A new symbol of defiance arose, holding up keys and shaking them in the air, telling the communists to pack their crap and leave. The Magic Lantern became a beacon to a wide swath of ideologies which had one agenda in common: freeing Czechoslovakia from Communist Party rule. This was to be a revolution, but a soft and peaceful one. It became known as the Velvet Revolution for just that reason. The authorities considered sending in tanks, not the Russian ones this time, but their own. This was the position Defense Minister Yaroslav Vaklovich Yakish agreed. Force has to be met by force, he said. He saw what had happened in Berlin just days prior. All the government apparatchiks saw. Finally, on Wednesday, November 22nd, they decided to call out the People's Militia. They were about to prove Bakunin right, that the people are not much happier when they are beaten by the People's Militia. There was just one problem. The People's Militia refused to take up arms against their countrymen, especially...
It's a audio book called The White Pill by Michael Malice.
That the army would not fight them.
It's almost over.
That it was time for another
It's like chapter 16.
He expected that this time the Russians would be on the side of the people. He was not entirely incorrect. Gorbachev
I'm gonna pause it while I'm in the store though, because I want to hear this part.
To see firsthand what was going on. The man went directly to the Magic Lantern and personally met with
I
the
could
Civic
probably
Forum
get some
itself.
gas too.
The Soviet embassy also received a delegation to the Civic Forum. These were unmistakable signals that the Russians regard the organization as a legitimate, respectable political force in Czechoslovakia. The Czechoslovakian government tried to censor the imagery of the protests from the television news, but there was too much foreign coverage to keep the information from the public. Nor was it possible to sweep the story under the rug, not when hundreds of thousands of people
I'll
were
be right back.
demonstrating.
All right, we're here. What did I miss? Bark, 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 bark. Grr, yep. Guess what I found here? I haven't been able to find them anywhere. They're probably at Kroger's now, but I haven't been there in a while. The most Oreo. Cookies and cream filled Oreos. Limited edition. Yeah, for now.
Weather. Word of mouth alone would have been enough to inform the entire population.
All right, we're heading to Monroe. I am going to cut it off when we get there and switch it to the desktop, though.
Leader of the Prague Spring, appeared alongside Havel on a balcony at the Melanchthon building and spoke to the audience of 500,000.
Gotta get going though, because I got appointments at 1:30, and it's gonna get me there at 1:15. Cool. All right, we got about a 47-minute drive.
The spirit of 1968 was alive and well in Prague. 1 hour later, both men held a press conference at the Magic Lantern. As they disagreed with one another about the future, Dubček still regarded communism as salvageable in his sense of socialism with a human face. The news broke across the entire country. The Communist Party leaders were all resigning. Garton Ash had joked to Havel, in Poland it took 10 years, in Hungary 10 months, in East Germany 10 weeks, perhaps in Czechoslovakia it will take 10 days. 10 days was a ridiculously optimistic estimate, and it turned out an overly conservative one. Instead of 10 days, it had taken 7. As a test, the Civic Forum called a nationwide general strike for Monday the 27th. The strike was to last 2 hours, but would clearly demonstrate who was on which side and whether the caretaker government would or even could do anything to stop them. It was instantly clear, as it had been in that crucial vote in Poland, that virtually all the workers were on the side of the protesters against the communists. The television anchor who delivered news of the strike simultaneously announced that he was joining it. The Communist Party officially abandoned power the very next day. Instead of sending in the tanks, now the leaders were concerned for their own safety. Prime Minister Ladislav Adamec secretly met with Havel to try and secure guarantees that there would be no repercussions for him and his cabal for the decades of oppression that they had imposed upon the people of Czechoslovakia. They were effectively and understandably acknowledging that in a week the man had gone from a pariah to the de facto leader of the country. It is the one example where the Czechoslovakian communists were prescient and in touch with the masses. By the end of 1989, Havel would be officially sworn in as president of Czechoslovakia, while Dubček became chairman of the parliament. They did not seek vengeance for the former communist leaders. Additionally, all 5 of the Warsaw Pact nations who had taken part in the 1968 invasion of Czechoslovakia now officially renounced and condemned their past actions. The Velvet Revolution ended in forgiveness and peace. By 1992, the Czech and Slovak peoples would come to realize that they would prefer to peacefully go their own separate ways, and the Velvet Revolution would give way to the Velvet Divorce. After some intense negotiations, the country of Czechoslovakia was dissolved as of the end of 1992 and birthed the nations of Slovakia and the Czech Republic. In 2001, the Museum of Communism opened up in Prague, a few blocks from Wenceslas Square. Visitors can tour exhibits dedicated to showing how collectivization is one symbol of the depravity of the communist regime, and just as today's cigarette packs warn us that smoking causes serious damage to our health, back then, spending time in a communist country could also seriously damage your health. The Czech Communist Party was one of the few communist parties that did not try to rebrand, continuing to compete for parliamentary representation. Never again in government, they reached a high point of 41 out of 200 seats in 2002, before eventually falling below the 5% minimum threshold and losing all parliamentary representation in 2021. But as Czechoslovakia chose to separate, the two Germanys sought to reunify. The Berlin Wall was also a sort of political dam, and when it fell, the fortunes of the East German Communist Party fell with it. Egon Krenz only managed to last 46 days in office, as decades of hatred for the East German government spilled out into the open without fear of repercussions. By the end, Stasi chief Erich Mielke was reduced to being openly booed in parliament, an 81-year-old dinosaur blubbering, "I love you all," and "I love all human beings." The Stasi went from absolute power to absolute impotence. In a bizarre reversal of authority, the protesters took the Stasi building on December 4, 1989. The guards asked to see their papers as they entered the building. The protesters dutifully complied before seizing and occupying it, sitting nervously in the hallways of the agency that had spied on them all. Desperate to maintain some semblance of power, East German party members proceeded to do everything possible to blame their predecessors for the oppression that they had visited upon the citizenry. The party's official name was changed from the Socialist Unity Party to the Party of Democratic Socialism. Mielke was stripped of his party card, as were Krenz and Schabowski and Honecker. Parliamentary elections in East Germany resulted in the former communists placing a respectable third place, setting the stage for German reunification on October 3rd, 1990. Krenz was eventually arrested and imprisoned for a few years for his crimes. Schabowski only
We're going to take a different route. It says that the timing's the same, so we're going to go north initially.
Mielke became Germany's oldest prisoner before being released after several years due to his senile dementia. He ended his days in a nursing home, having imaginary conversations with Stasi officers on a telephone that wasn't even plugged in. Honecker spent his few remaining years in a constant battle against both cancer and prosecution before passing away in 1994. As for Margot, she got in her proverbial broom and escaped to Chile. There she survived, unapologetic and unrepentant, until the age of 89 before returning to hell in 2016. Of all the Warsaw Pact countries, it was Romania that was most determined to
turning to hell. That's awesome.
The nations surrounding it overthrew the communist governments one after another. News of the international unrest had breached even Ceausescu's firmly guarded borders, but Nikolai and Elena weren't going anywhere if they had their way. Yet by the time reporter Kenneth Auchincloss had interviewed him in late 1989, he said that Ceausescu had no presence at all, no aura, no eloquence. The impression you had was of a pathetic figure, completely cut off from the realities of Romania, living in the past in a dream world. The troubles in Romania started with a pastor named Laszlo Tokic. Unlike many other clergymen in Romania, Tokic was not in collusion with the authorities. His sermons took subtle digs at Ceausescu, and at one point he even publicly joined in on criticism of Ceausescu's systemization policy. For this, Tokic was arrested, and soon church leaders, all highly subservient to the government, tried to have him evicted from his Timisoara home. As his battle in court proceeded, a group of 4 men broke into his house and beat him in front of his 3-year-old son and pregnant wife. When she yelled at the police station outside for help, Tokic was of course under surveillance. They did nothing. The 4 men were clearly not home invaders, but officers from Romania's version of the KGB, the Securitate, who were just following orders. Having lost his legal appeals, Tokic was due to be evicted on December 15, 1989. At first, his congregation gathered together in a sign of protest. Very quickly, a larger crowd formed, as protesting Tokic's eviction became a mechanism for protest the Ceausescu government itself. The protests continued to the next day, and now Ceausescu ordered arrests. It was too little, too late. The demonstrators took over Communist Party headquarters and ransacked the building. Tokic and his family were taken to custody, and he was once again beaten. The officers threatened to beat his pregnant wife as well, unless he signed a blank piece of paper, which was meant to later be used to show that he had accepted the verdict against him. Unsatisfied, Nikolai and Elena demanded blood. Fidel Castro is right, he said. You do not quiet your enemy by talking to him like a priest, but by burning him. They've got to kill the hooligans, not beat them. He then fired the defense minister, Minister of the Interior, and chief of the Securitate's troops on the spot. Do you know what I'm going to do with you? He asked them. Send you to the firing squad. We've got to take radical measures, agreed Elena. We can't be indulgent. Having put the fear of the bullet into his officials, Ceausescu then reinstated them. They nothing. That only made the most outlandish numbers seem that much more truthful. The actual deaths were fewer than 100, but it didn't matter much. Ceausescu was clearly prepared to shed large amounts of blood to maintain his power, and the people knew it. Ceausescu held a rally in Bucharest on December 21, 1989. His goons packed the audience with the most reliable Romanians they could find. The televised speech would reassure the country that Ceausescu remained in control and was as popular as ever. Boos from the crowd began just a few minutes after he began to speak. Then came the chants of Timisoara and We Are the People. The moment where Ceausescu realized the crowd had turned against him, the second he paused and looked confused at the impossible becoming real, was broadcast live throughout Romania. Then the screen went blank. Eventually, the television stations resumed broadcasting, and they showed the crowds and the chaos. Ceausescu huddled in the building with his most loyal henchmen and Elena for an entire day as rioting broke out. Used to following orders from the dictator, the Romanian army waited in their barracks as the unrest spread. The next day, Ceausescu tried to pin the blame on the arrest on Defense Minister Vasile Milea and fired the man, who then shot himself. It was almost exactly 24 hours after his rally that the Ceausescus fled to the roof of the building, where a helicopter had just landed for them. They knew that there were several countries to which they could escape, and they had hundreds of millions of dollars stashed away in Swiss bank accounts. But Ceausescu wasn't about to give up power so easily. Into the helicopter stepped the Ceausescus, their 2 bodyguards, and both the Prime Minister and Deputy Prime Minister. It was a great deal of weight for the copter, but it made it into the air. Ceausescu ordered the pilot to take them to their palace in the town of Snagov. Attempts to contact the Securitate in the Oltenia region failed. Unbeknownst to the passengers, everyone at the Securitate Communication Center had fled. Claims that Malaya was responsible for the arrest fell on deaf ears. For decades, the Romanian people had been constantly told, that it was Ceausescu who was responsible for their country and what happened in it. Accusing a scapegoat was an absurdity. If anything, Malaya was seen as yet another Ceausescu victim. Hearing what happened to him made the armed forces take sides with the people. The soldiers made it a point of showing their guns were unloaded. Others stood up from their tanks and waved to the crowd. Once at Snagov Palace, Ceausescu worked the phones, trying to figure out which parts of the country remained under his control. The helicopter pilot, eager to get out of the situation, insisted that the copter couldn't hold that many people again. The group now took off without the Prime Minister and Deputy Prime Minister, making their way to the town of Pitești. Knowing that copters had been grounded all over the country, the pilot flew high to make sure that he'd be visible. "We've been spotted by radar," he told Ceausescu. "We could be shot down at any moment." Panicked, Ceausescu told the pilot to land in the field beneath them, close by the road. There, the pilot abandoned the Ceausescu's with their body. One of the bodyguards flagged down a car and the three of them squeezed in. The other bodyguard flagged down another car and followed until the driver lied and said he was running out of gas. That bodyguard got out by the side of the road as the relieved driver made his way to safety. The Ceausescu's made their way to the village of Bucharesti, switching to a better car that they had spotted. A few days prior, Nicolae Ceausescu could have done virtually anything in Romania. Now he was trying to be anonymous in a country where his image was everywhere, where the entire population was told about his exploits from sunrise to sunset 7 days a week. He told the new driver to take them to one of his prized steel factories, but when they arrived, they discovered that, like every other Romanian factory in strike, instead of being welcomed in, the car was greeted with rocks being thrown by the workers. They drove instead to Târgoviste, leaving their last bodyguard behind for reasons that are unclear. They were finally welcomed at the Plant Protection Center, an establishment used to showcase Ceausescu's supposed accomplishments. The center's director called the militia to pick up the Ceausescus and drive them to safety. A militia car picked them up, but could only take them around in circles as Târgoviste was in full-fledged rebellion. The Târgoviste army commander understood by this point that both the Romanian people and the military had turned against the Ceausescu's. His barracks were only 500 yards away from the militia building, and he decided to occupy it. The Ceausescu's were instantly taken into custody when they arrived there 4 hours after leaving the center. "Well, what's the situation?" barked Ceausescu. "Give me your report." He thought he was still commander-in-chief, but eventually came to understand that he was not the military men's leader, but their prisoner. Nor was Ceausescu an easy prisoner to accommodate. For almost 2 days, he and Elena harangued their captors by
I wins today
food,
for sure.
that crap, to the bathroom accommodations.
You can see the shingles on that speedway getting tore up from the wind. It's so strong.
So he could address the people outside who were chanting for his blood while oblivious to his proximity. The military men understandably refused. Elena's most reasonable fit came when the diabetic Nicolae was given tea with sugar. She demanded insulin for her husband, but wouldn't give it to him when she finally received it, possibly due to a worry that it had been poisoned. Shortly before midnight on the 24th, the militia building came under fire from Securitate troops. The prisoners were taken to an armored car, hiding on the floor for 5 hours while gunfire was exchanged. Eventually, the secret police were beaten back. Now it was clear to the soldiers that time was of the essence and that they would not be able to imprison the Ceausescu's indefinitely. If anything, they were putting their own lives at risk by holding them captive. Already, a group called the National Salvation Front was trying to establish itself as government of Romania. General Victor Stanculescu arrived in Târgoviste to bring the case of the Ceausescu's to a close. It was decided to put the couple on trial then and there. When he was 15, young Nicolae had told his brother-in-law that he was going to be Romania's Stalin. Now he and Elena were going to be the defendants in a trial so absurd that even Stalin would have blushed. A classroom in a nearby school was hastily set up to serve as the court. The defense attorney was given 10 minutes to confer with his clients. The best he could come up with was to plead insanity, which
it's actually
found to be unconscionable.
Supposed to get up to 61 degrees today in Michigan.
Not unreasonably, "I refuse to answer
Northern
those
Ohio.
who fomented this coup d'etat. I am not the accused. I am the president of the republic. I am your commander-in-chief.
It's cold as fuck yesterday, but
since the age of 14. The
61 today. Isn't that crazy?
Organizing armed action against the people in the state, the destruction of public assets and buildings, sabotage of the national.
I don't care as long as that toxic spill doesn't work its way over this way. Keep blowing east.
If she was mentally defective. Let's get this over.
Sorry, Washington D. I hope you get covered with that shit.
After a 5-minute recess, the judges returned to the courtroom and delivered a verdict of death. As both of the Ceausescu's got their hands bound with rope, Nicolae insisted that Romania will live and learn of your treachery. Under Romanian law, a death sentence could only be carried out 10 days after a verdict had been delivered. For a brief period, the couple still felt somewhat secure. There's often a question as to whether rulers like the Ceausescu's believe their own bullshit. In Elena's case, at least, that definitely seems to have been her view. I brought you up like a mother, she shrieked at the soldiers. Lady, one of them replied, you're in real trouble. Her reply was either, you keep away from me, you motherfucker, or go fuck your mother. A very unfortunate choice of words given what the 73-year-old woman had said to them moments prior. It was only when the Ceausescus were taken outside to the school courtyard and not to some helicopter waiting to return them to Bucharest that the two of them realized what was about to happen. Look, Elena said, they're going to shoot us like dogs. The couple was placed up against the wall, and then the waiting soldiers proved the bitch correct. There were over 100 bullets shot in total by the time they stopped firing their AK-47s at the Ceausescus. As usual, it was bitterly cold in Romania that winter day, with the temperature not even reaching 45 degrees in the capital city of Bucharest. And though no snow fell, it didn't seem to make much of a difference. That day, December 25th, 1989, was still the best Christmas that the Romanian people had ever had. Chapter 16. The White Pill. Part of Gorbachev's reordering of the Soviet Union's political structure allowed for other alternative voices to emerge. The Stalinist insistence on complete orthodoxy gave way to a far more disparate process of discussing issues and looking for solutions. This not only allowed, but pretty much guaranteed, that other personalities would emerge to achieve prominence in the USSR. The best example of this is Boris Yeltsin. At the end of 1985, Yeltsin was appointed first secretary of Moscow City Committee, a position roughly akin to mayor, despite his reputation for having a fondness for the bottle. This wasn't entirely uncommon in the Soviet Union, which in many ways was more puritanical than the United States. Gorbachev started his memoirs recounting a scene where he was summoned to Chernenko's office while he was himself inebriated. It should be pointed out that in those days, it was customary to drink liquor quite frequently on various occasions, he wrote somewhat defensively. However, having never had a propensity for alcohol, I was in a fairly normal state when I arrived. From the very beginning, Yeltsin exploited his position to further his personal ambition. As Gorbachev recounted, it seemed to me that Yeltsin happened to be in the eye of the storm, since it was in the capital that the interests of the city, republic, and central institutions of the old system were most closely entwined. He tried to rally Moscow party organizations and the Muscovites themselves against these structures, and in my opinion, he was right in this attempt. However, from the very beginning, he used populist methods to achieve his goal. He would suddenly appear at a factory, take the manager and lead him to the workers' cafeteria to give him a public dressing down, acting as if he were the protector of the people and the manager a monster of cruelty. Sometimes he'd get on a bus or a tram or drop into a shop or hospital, and the next day all of Moscow would be filled with rumors of this. To the enraptured applause of Muscovites, he promised that the problems of housing, medical care, and services would be resolved in record time. He displayed colorful drawings of meat processing plants and dairies being built around the capital to do away with the eternal shortage of sausage and buttermilk. All of this was trumpeted in the Moscow press, radio, and television. His search for new forms of party work was also meant mostly for effect. For example, meetings of the Moscow City Committee began to be held at 11 or 12 at night. Tensions between Yeltsin and Gorbachev, as well as Yeltsin and the Communist Party, eventually spilled out into the public. In late 1987, Yeltsin made a speech that called out Gorbachev, the Communist Party, and perestroika itself for good measure. Not only that, but he quit the Politburo in the guise of giving all the leaders of the Soviet Union an ultimatum. It was the most head-on assault on the power of the General Secretary since Trotsky. Yeltsin's speech was seen less as an act of integrity and more a dishonest act of pride and ambition, throwing people under the bus in order to further his personal standing. Things reached a low shortly thereafter, in the morning of November 9, 1987, when Yeltsin was found covered in blood. Gorbachev recounted how Yeltsin would later claim he'd been mugged and fought off his attackers, and, of course, he had tossed them about like kittens, but still he had received a knife wound. Needless to say, this tale sounded much more heroic. By then, I had already discovered Yeltsin's talent for fiction. In reality, the wound was clearly self-inflicted, possibly a suicide attempt. Gorbachev explained how the doctor said that the wound was not critical at all. The scissors, by slipping over his ribs, had left a bloody but superficial wound. In Yeltsin's defense, all this could have occurred during one of his drunken stupors. Years later, it would be Bill Clinton's turn to deal with Yeltsin's hijinks. Clinton confidentially discussed the matter with author Taylor Branch. Clinton had received notice of a major pre-dawn security alarm when Secret Service agents discovered Yeltsin alone on Pennsylvania Avenue, dead drunk, clad in his underwear, yelling for a taxi. Yeltsin slurred his words in a loud argument with the baffled agents. He did not want to go back into Blair House where he was staying. He wanted a taxi to go out for pizza. I asked what became of the standoff. Well, the president said, shrugging, he got his pizza. Gorbachev phoned Yeltsin in the hospital to demand that he discuss his speech with the Moscow City Committee. I can't, Yeltsin said. The doctors won't even let me get up. That's okay, Gorbachev replied sarcastically. The doctors will help you. They pumped Yeltsin full of sedatives and an anti-spasm agent and sent him on to meet his fate. Yuri Plekhanov, the KGB agent tasked with protecting Soviet leaders, was at the hospital, and even he thought this was too sadistic. But Yeltsin had ruffled too many feathers, and publicly so. For 4 hours, he was berated by 24 speakers before admitting his guilt and accepting his dismissal. While he lost his political position, he nevertheless became a symbol of people's distaste with the Soviet system, the very system Gorbachev was trying to reform and salvage. Indeed, it was only under the old system where Yeltsin could have been kept out of office. When Gorbachev led the way to introduce the Congress of People's Deputies of the Soviet Union in 1989, Yeltsin was elected as a delegate with 92% of the vote. He quickly became an oppositional leader in the newfound parliamentary body. It was in that capacity that he visited the United States later that year. After touring the Johnson Space Center on September 16, 1989, Yeltsin took an unscheduled visit to a Randall's supermarket in Houston, Texas. Photos exist of him being awed by the boxes of Kool-Aid popsicles and the overflowing bins of onions. He was told that the store stocked 30,000 items, while the typical Soviet store ostensibly carried fewer than 100, but in practice often had bare shelves. It would have seemed like ridiculous pro-American propaganda, but for the fact that Yeltsin was witnessing it all with his own eyes. Average Americans could buy things out of reach of the wealthiest Soviet citizens. The conquest of bread had been won by the West. As Yeltsin flew on to Miami, he clutched his head in his hands, his brain rewiring itself from decades of being told things that were simply not true. He also understood that those saying such things couldn't have been just misinformed, not to this extent. They were knowingly, brazenly lying, or at the very least completely indifferent to the facts. They had to fool the people, he realized. It is now clear why they made it so difficult for the average Soviet citizen to go abroad. They were afraid that people's eyes would open. Not only was Gorbachev losing standing as the sole leader in the USSR as Yeltsin emerged, but the Soviet government itself began to lose power as the sole decision-making body. The USSR's Republic of Lithuania held elections in February 1990. The vote led to a Supreme Council issuing what was called an Act on the Establishment of the State of Lithuania, a declaration that Lithuania was a sovereign nation free of Soviet rule. Gorbachev immediately declared the act null and void and implemented an economic blockade against the small Baltic nation. Lithuania was not East Germany or Hungary. It was still part of the USSR, and as such was under his purview. From his perspective, there was a process for secession, and that process would have necessarily involved a Lithuanian referendum. The economic consequences grew dire for the Lithuanian people, with inflation hitting 100%. Nevertheless, the Lithuanian authorities persisted, and despite Gorbachev's misgivings, in May 1990, Yeltsin was elected chairman of Russia's parliament. In doing so, he now represented the republic that contained half of the USSR's population, 76% of its land, and 90% of Soviet oil production. The issue with democracy is that sometimes the votes don't go the way a person would like them to. After all that had happened in the previous couple of years, the Russians finally chose to send in the tanks to Lithuania. On January 11, 1991, Russian troops fired in a crowd of protesters, killing over a dozen and wounding many more. When the Soviets later claimed that the protesters shot first, their story was instantly debunked by foreign reporters who were eyewitnesses to the whole affair. Soviet troops stormed the
U.S. government plates doing 80 miles an hour in a 60.
Television building in an attempt to take control of the narrative of information. All this had the
pickup
opposite
truck has
result that the
government
Soviets
plates.
wanted. Thousands of unarmed Lithuanians then took to surrounding their parliament building around the clock to protect their government against further Soviet aggression. They kept themselves warm by
somebody in a
building
fucking
huge
wig.
bonfires out of Soviet propaganda. Gorbachev
That is
claimed
so
all this was
weird.
done without his permission or even knowledge.
Talking on a
and
radio.
later tried to figure out who gave him to use force when he heard
Almost
the
yelling
news.
at somebody.
In either case, he was either complicit or appeared powerless to stop it.
That's
Other
weird.
nations condemned the USSR in no uncertain terms, and 3 weeks after the attacks, Iceland officially recognized the Republic of Lithuania. 5 days after that, the Lithuanian government held a national referendum with over 90% of the votes being cast in favor of Lithuania staying independent. Uncomfortable with the blood that had already been spilled, Gorbachev was against further escalating the situation. Instead, however, the idea of secession was
I'll let him
quickly
pass
spreading
me
to
so you
other
can see
Soviet
him.
republics. Alongside
Oh, no, he
Russia,
fell back in.
Ukraine, and Belarusia, Transcaucasia had been one of the 4 founding members of the USSR in 1922. In 1936, it was split into its 3 constituent parts of Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Georgia.
True,
On March
true.
31, 1991, Georgia too held a referendum.
almost like the person's in
and
disguise.
99.5% of the voters chose to leave the Soviet
It's so
Union.
weird.
Yeltsin got another promotion in
Dark
June,
sunglasses,
ultimately
big old
becoming
hairy-
the president of
hairy
Russia
wig.
with almost 59%
Looks like the structure of a
his
guy,
closest
but almost a
rival,
woman's
Gorbachev,
wig.
choice of Nikolai Ryzhkov, received only 16%.
Weird as fuck. Trying to let him catch up to me, but now he's slowing down. He must have noticed I had cameras. I'm literally doing 60 now, trying to let him catch up. I don't know if is Mrs. Doc in here? I haven't been watching the chat.
Specifically told Gorbachev that dismissing Khrushchev would be necessary
Oh, hi.
in order to believe in this newly reformed
Yeah, she's here, I see.
of sovereign states. But despite having this discussion with Gorbachev on a balcony in an attempt to avoid eavesdropping, the hidden KGB microphones.
Cows out of the barn.
Anyway, the Union of Soviet Socialist.
Yeah, now this person's like right on my plate. Literally right on my ass. I wonder if they're going to exit here. Let me get over so they...
Khrushchev spent weeks getting his allies.
This person does not know what they're doing.
Moscow for his Crimean dacha on August 4,
There he goes. Okay, they're passing up on the right.
Their plan in order. On August
Oh,
18th,
exiting here.
Gorbachev was informed that a group of comrades was there to see him. Not expecting anyone, he was livid at
That's so weird.
His personal bodyguard explained that the team had come with Yuri Plekhanov, the same KGB official who had been in the hospital.
Good Joe.
Yeltsin. Still miffed, Gorbachev gave instructions to have them wait. He picked up a phone.
Detox paradise.
The line was dead, as was the second phone, and the third, and the fourth. Finally, he lifted the cover for the red phone to be used in the event of a nuclear attack on the USSR. A phone so important that no one was permitted to touch it even just for dusting. It too was dead. Now Gorbachev understood that a coup was underway. He went outside to discuss the matter with his wife Raisa. Highly educated, she understood how dangerous of a situation the two of them were in. Gorbachev returned to his study to be greeted by 5 elite Soviet officials, Plekhanov among them. The men were clearly nervous, and Gorbachev was enraged. He began interrogating them about what was...
That's a pretty much luxury detox there, though. Definitely not a government-run detox. They take care of those folks out there.
As well. They gave Gorbachev 2 options, to either declare a state of emergency or to transfer his power to Vice President Yanayev, who had joined his name to the coup. To hell with you, Gorbachev told them. Mikhail Sergeyevich, his chief of staff, said, you don't understand what the situation in the country is. Shut up, you prick. How dare you give me lectures about the situation in the country? The men flew back to Moscow a bit rattled by the meeting. The following day, the media issued the plotters' declaration. Due to Gorbachev's state of health, Vice President Gennady Yanayev was now assuming the responsibilities of the president in accordance with the Constitution of the USSR. Boris Yeltsin was awakened to news of the coup by his youngest daughter, and like many other Russians, was completely baffled by what the proclamation meant. He tried to call Yanayev, but Yanayev refused
to
speak.
I think it's the last chapter.
Call Gorbachev, the call could not get put through. For all of his escapades, Boris Yeltsin was no dummy. A few weeks prior, he had bonded with high-ranking General Pavel Grachev over bottles of vodka. If our lawfully elected government in Russia were ever threatened, a terrorist act, a coup, efforts to arrest leaders, could the military be relied on? Yeltsin had asked him. Could you be relied on? Yes, Grachev replied. Knowing he had to scramble as fast as possible, Yeltsin called Grachev to remind him of their conversation. Though Yeltsin did not realize it, Grachev's fingerprints...
Another U.S. government plates. What the fuck is going on? There's a bunch of them here.
Before decency got the better of him. I'll send you a security detachment, he promised Yeltsin. As recently as 1989,
what the fuck is going on?
The Soviet Union were locked up
2 in a row here on the left. That black car and this white van.
As if they could still somehow control the flow of information, despite all the technological advances that had been made since the Stalin era. Yeltsin issued a statement denouncing the coup in no uncertain
It's already started, man.
His declaration was then disseminated around the world.
It's already started.
Donning a bulletproof vest, Yeltsin got into his limo and began the ride to his office in Moscow's Whitehouse. On his way to the government building, he passed hundreds of armored vehicles. When Yeltsin got to the White House, he was greeted by a crowd of journalists who were themselves heavily outnumbered by the citizenry. At least 50 tanks are on their way to this building, Yeltsin announced. Anybody who wants to save himself can do so. He then made his way up to his office on the 5th floor. When the tanks eventually arrived, Yeltsin went back down to greet them. In a public display of fearlessness, Yeltsin approached one tank and posed for pictures while shaking the hands of its commander. Apparently, they're not going to shoot the president of Russia just yet, he quipped. In the Soviet Union, dark humor was like food. Not everyone got it. In this case, they all got it. And so did everyone watching the scenes unfold on televisions around the world. Back at Gorbachev's dacha, Raisa was a bit more fearful than Yeltsin appeared to be. The Gorbachevs could only receive information from outside the compound via Mikhail's transistor radio, and they weren't able to send messages to the outside world.
Yeah.
When Raisa heard the announcement that Gorbachev was being deposed, she understood.
I don't think there'll ever be another declaration of war. Not in this government.
And refused to serve anything that hadn't already come prepackaged. Her husband wouldn't back down no matter what was done to him, but their grandchildren were at the dacha with them. We all knew our history, she later said. That history taught Raisa how persuasive threats to one's family could be and how often those threats were actually carried out in the Soviet Union. Desperate to get his message out, Gorbachev recorded a speech discussing what had happened and demonstrating that he remained in good health. He repeated his speech 4 times and then cut the tape into 4 sections. He gave 1 section each to his personal secretary, his doctor, and an aide, while keeping the 4th for himself. This was his insurance that the truth would be heard if the worst came to pass. Yeltsin was in a far better position than Gorbachev to fight the plot, and he did so with every tool at his disposal. He did not acknowledge the coup's legal authority and proceeded to govern accordingly. He issued warrants for the arrest of the plotters, declared himself commander-in-chief of Soviet...
I still want to believe that more than half of the military is not the woke idiots that we keep seeing. I know a lot of them, and they think it's disgusting as well, so... I know they've lost a lot of the good ones because of the mandates and all that other crap, but I still want to believe that. But we'll see. Getting brakes on the freeway, that's always cool.
Soon the streets around
oh, because of the government vehicles.
Thousands of locals, just as Tiananmen Square had been.
Look at these guys.
2 years prior. That Tuesday night, Yeltsin
They're controlling speed on the highway now. Ooh, big old deer there.
Constitutional order will triumph, he promised.
Oh no, that's a Michigan plate there.
Russia
Where'd they go? That's weird.
11 p.m.,
Oh, they're way up ahead. Okay. These are just idiots.
In the streets. The Alpha Group tasked with storming the White House had that name for a reason. They were the best that the KGB had to offer. But after some reconnaissance, Deputy Commander Mikhail Golovatov had some second thoughts about their task at hand. Thousands of the civilians were themselves armed, and extracting Yeltsin and the others without heavy losses would be impossible. Golovatov was no coward, and he was no novice. He had personally led the Soviet assault on the Lithuanian facilities. He decided to ask his men what they thought. "We will not go to the White House to kill people," a member of his team told him, "and we will not lead you there," Golovatov agreed. Grachev had a quick discussion with the head of the Air Force.
The Amish are the most self-sufficient. They know that. They know if they cut off power and everything like that, the Amish aren't going to have any issues.
Because strong men with guns defied their orders, choosing peace over force. Nevertheless, a few lives were still lost. One drunk young man climbed atop an armored personnel carrier and engaged with the gunner, losing his life when he fell headfirst off the vehicle. Another APC gunner fired into the air when he was being besieged, and a ricocheting bullet killed a second man. A third man died when he began to throw rocks at an APC and was shot in response. Yeltsin could hear the fighting outside and hid in a bomb shelter under the White House for the night, hoping for the best. For hours, Khrushchev was befuddled as to why Grachev's men weren't clearing the way for the Alpha Group to storm the White House. At 2 a.m., he got the call. The army was not going to do anything. He was on his own. Voices were raised and fingers were pointed, but in the end, there was little else that the plotters could do. Soviet citizens woke up to hear the news that Khrushchev was sending a delegation to visit Gorbachev and check on his health. Raisa thought this was it and began racking her brain as to where her husband could hide. In her panic, she suffered a minor stroke, leaving her mute and partially paralyzed for several hours. When the plotters arrived, a furious Gorbachev refused to speak with them, demanding that his phones be restored before he would see them. The message came back that this would take a great deal of time. "I am not in a hurry to go anywhere," he snapped. It took almost 2 hours, and Gorbachev's first priority was making calls to officials at home and abroad about what had transpired. At 8 p.m., a delegation from the Russian government also arrived at the dacha, and Gorbachev met with them immediately. It was a joyous reunion as all the men realized how close they had come to calamity, if not personal destruction as well. After tears and some arguing, they agreed on the next steps. Later that night, the bulk of the plotters were separated from Khrushchev and flown back to Moscow on their own. Deprived of his security, Khrushchev was seated in the back of the Russians' plane alongside General Streligov and
Look at hydrogen bombs right there.
After Gorbachev, his family,
Basically,
Russian officials got
pure
to flight,
hydrogen.
Khrushchev moved to follow them. "Wait a little bit," Streligov told him. When Khrushchev tried to get up again a few minutes later, Streligov again told him to remain seated. "I think I understand what is happening," Khrushchev said. "You have understood correctly." Vladimir Khrushchev, the last functional member of the KGB, was thereupon arrested and, alongside his accomplices, charged with high treason. His KGB successor, Vadim Bakatin, didn't even last 100 days before dissolving the organization. "The traditions of Chekism must be eradicated," Bakatin declared. Gorbachev returned to work the following day. In the past 48 hours, sensing the chaos in the USSR and fearing a resurgence of Soviet aggression, Latvia and Estonia had both taken the opportunity to affirm their sovereignty as independent nations, just as their sister Baltic state of Lithuania had done previously. But Gorbachev had a more pressing concern in his desk, far closer to home. He was informed that documents were being destroyed at an intensive rate at the Communist Party's Central Committee building as a mob besieged the structure. Gorbachev immediately signed an order suspending any activity in the building. The good communists, obedient to authority, dutifully stopped what they were doing and peacefully evacuated the building. It was indeed a smart move to protect themselves as well. The mob had unsuccessfully tried to tear down the statue of secret police founder Felix Dzerzhinsky the night before, so the Russian authorities had removed it via crane to prevent bedlam from breaking out. Gorbachev and Yeltsin soon appeared together at the White House and announced a decree suspending the Communist Party. At the time of its demise, it had 15 million members, wrote Dobbs. Not a single one of them put up any resistance. He broke it down even further. For 7 decades after the 1917 revolution, the Communist Party had deliberately cultivated mystery as a key to maintaining its own power. Separated from the people they ruled by a wall of ritual, party leaders acquired an aura of omniscience and aloofness. Scarcely anything was known about their private lives or personal political views. No ordinary mortal was allowed to know how these bureaucratic supermen acquired their fine clothes, what kind of books and films they enjoyed, or how they made a seemingly miraculous appearance on top of Lenin's tomb in Red Square on public holidays. Everything was hidden behind the veiled curtains of the Central Committee building and the limousines that swept through the silent city. As the mysteries were gradually explained, the party's grip over society was automatically undermined. Now the final curtain was ripped away, to reveal a group of frightened and rather unremarkable people, more intent on saving themselves and the regime they served. A few days later, Belarus declared its independence from the Soviet Union, with Azerbaijan following shortly thereafter. 1 week later, on September 6, 1991, the Soviet Union officially acknowledged Lithuania's independence. 2 weeks after that, Armenia declared its independence as well. Then, on December 1st, Ukraine held a referendum of its own on the question of national sovereignty.
My drive is only about another 10 minutes, and then I'm going to restart it on the desktop. But wait, I'm going to listen to the end of the book. How much time is up in the book?
Between them, the men represented three of the four founding Soviet republics, only missing Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Georgia, what then made up the Republic of Transcaucasia. On December 8, 1991,
about 10 minutes,
issued the Bielefeld Accords, which decreed that the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics is ceasing its existence
I'm exiting now.
To international law and a geopolitical reality. Both Russia and Ukraine, the two most populous Soviet republics by far, were officially seceding from the USSR. It was only hours later that Stanislav Shushkevich, president of Belarus, got on the phone with Gorbachev. In response to Gorbachev's questions, he confessed to two things. First, the men had called President George H.W. Bush way before they had called him, and second, the Bielefeld Accords were already signed and binding. Mikhail Gorbachev had been the youngest leader of the Soviet Union since Stalin when he assumed office in 1985. By 1991, he was already an old man from another time. On Christmas Day 1991, Mikhail Gorbachev resigned his position as president of the Soviet Union. At 7:35 p.m., the hammer and sickle flag of the USSR was permanently lowered from the Kremlin. The following day, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, now a government without a country, officially voted itself out of existence. Cynics like to lie and call themselves realists, hoping for positive outcomes, and they happen often, can thus be dismissed as being naive or utopian. In 1981, the overwhelming expert consensus was one of détente, the premise that the world would be split between a communist USSR and a democratic USA for decades to come. Realpolitik, yet another foreign word imported to signal sophistication, include the premise that the corrupt and decaying USSR wasn't going anywhere. Few of the experts ever admitted that they were wrong.
This is the weed exit for sure.
That they were the ones who were being unrealistically naive and dystopian. As historian Arthur Brown observed, politicians and analysts were finding a variety of reasons why the previously impossible had either been inevitable all along or had needed additional American military and economic pressure in Moscow to make it happen. In politics, the argument is that power never cedes power without massive war and bloodshed.
One time I ever eat bugs is because I want to have a little delicacy with a piece of chocolate on it or something. That's all. I am not going to eat bugs for protein, for sure.
Having the ability to make choices. Within 10 years, the Soviet Union went from being a perpetual world-dominating superpower to literal non-existence and is now becoming a forgotten chapter of world history, more of a kitschy joke than a cautionary tale. But Ayn Rand was right. This was no laughing matter. Millions of people were trapped for decades in countries where human life was nothing, less than nothing, and they knew it. They lived in constant terror from morning till night, and at night they were waiting for the doorbell to ring. In countries where there was no law or any rights of any kind, where basic necessities like food and housing were a constant struggle for everyone, and that they were absolutely forbidden to leave. Did they all live happily ever after when the Soviet Union dissolved? Of course not. Utopias don't exist, but progress does, and so do victories by good over evil. They happen all the time, both personally and politically. The foes of liberty are many and they are powerful, but they are not particularly impressive. They will do everything within their ability to convince others that their might is eternal, that battle against them is pointless and doomed to fail. This is just another one.
You own nothing and you will be happy.
They will never give up. Yet does wanting power
this quote
others mean that they will necessarily get it and get it easily? Does the fact that they supposedly will never give up somehow imply that their opponents should? Or does it imply the opposite? Evil people surrender all the time. At a certain point, the costs, in every sense of the term, simply become too high. They are not all-knowing, far from it. They are often not even particularly bright. They are not all-powerful. They are men and women, far closer to snakes than they are to gods. They can, will, and have been defeated many, many times. It is possible that those of us who fight for the dignity of mankind will lose our fight. It is not possible that we must.
I'm not sure that's actually him, but yeah, those pictures are hilarious.
The end.
Thanks, Michael.
Audible hopes you have enjoyed this program.
It was a good book. Most of you enjoyed most of it with me. All right. Wow, that big hunk of plastic just got stuck on the tar. Look at it, shredding now. Oh. I use Audible, part of Amazon, I guess. Being a Prime member, I get like 1 credit a month, which usually a book is a credit. So I like it too, because on your mobile device, it downloads the whole book in case you go offline, so it won't break it up. Yeah. We'll see about all that. Yeah, he's buying the cattle farms, but he doesn't believe in beef. I mean, he looks healthy too, doesn't he? Yeah, you can download it on whatever device you're logged into Audible on. I think you'd only be able to play it with your Audible account. I don't think you can, download it and then send it to somebody, because like a game. But you can gift credits to people. Like, I give credits to Miss Indoctrination all the time. She listens to books all the time. She uses them to go to sleep and stuff. A bunch of her Viking and heathen books, and detox therapy books and crap that she reads or listens to. How can you guys justify that? That's Medicaid won't pay that? Well, they must be regular insurance. They got to have insurance to be able to even be treated for that. Oh, I'd have to go in for some severe detox if that was the case. Okay, not detox. I was gonna say, how the hell do you detox from it? Oh shit! Trash can. What up, piggy? Bam for you. Cannabis has done amazing things for me over any pharmaceutical medicine. We got a lot of people here today. Maybe a minute before I can get things set up, guys. Looks like we got a few people waiting. Gotta get them to work. Oh yeah, very windy. Very windy. Hyperemesis system. So the weed is making them throw up? I've never heard of that. All right, I'll be back on once I get things set up in there, and we'll do some stream reviews and stuff like that. I'll let you guys listen to these idiots while playing. I always keep the camera off them though. All right, turn it around. Talk to you guys later. Come back by if you want. I should. What time is it? 1:10, maybe 1:30. I'll have it going again. Peace.